Hello, my book-loving friends, and welcome back to Storytime with Mary. This is where we get to read all of our favourite books and book lovers. If you are loving reading along with Mary, don't forget to hit the like button and also subscribe to our videos so that we can read together all the time. Book lovers, I've got such an adventure for you today. And this book is the gift that just keeps on giving because it's absolutely jam-packed full of lots and lots and lots of fairy stories. Today, we are reading a book called The Fairy Tales of Alberton Forest. This book is written by Lorraine Bernier. So if you've got The Fairy Tales of Alberton Forest at home, grab it now and let's read it together. And while you are grabbing your book, I want to tell you a fun fact about trees, because this book is all about a forest, and a forest is full of trees, of course. Book lovers, I want to tell you about the world's tallest tree. It is called Hyperion. It's actually got a name. The tree has a name, and it can be found in California. And this tree is so tall, it's 110.85 meters tall. Book lovers, I know that you probably can't imagine how tall 110.85 meters is, so I will give you a clue. It's probably about as tall as a skyscraper with 30 floors, or the Eiffel Tower is about 1,000 meters tall, so it's about a third of the Eiffel Tower. It is a really, really, really tall tree, book lovers. Okay, if you've grabbed your book, we are going to read just the first chapter of this book because, like I said, it's got lots and lots and lots of stories in it. So we can read this book again and again and again and again, and we can read lots of different chapters next time. But today, we're going to start with chapter 1. And chapter 1 is called Grandma Rosary and the Comfort Tree. But we're going to start with the introduction so we can get a feel of what happens in this book. In the centre of the mysterious and beautiful Alberton Forest stood a very tall oak tree. This tree was enchanted. Wow! Every morning as dawn broke on the horizon and the beaming rays of sun fought their way through the branches, there seemed to be a ruffling, a scuffling sound all the way down to the roots at the very bottom of the tree. At exactly 6 o'clock every morning in the forest, the air filled with sweet aroma of rose petals. Deep down under the roots of the old enchanted oak tree was a whole new world. The Fairy Tales of Alberton Forest. This is the home of the flower tree and fruit fairies. On the top of the hillside in Fairydale lived a very wise old fairy called Grandma Rosary. She was extremely respected by all of the other fairies. Her cotton wool, white, silky, soft hair sat on top of her head, just like a rose. Her cheeks were the rosiest, plumpest, and roundest smiley cheeks ever to be seen. She wore the tiniest pair of half-moon glasses that sat perfectly on her little button nose, and she wore petticoats made from layers and layers of delicate rose petals. She was normally seen at the very top of the hills amongst the rose bushes that surrounded the old oak tree. Grandma Rosary was a very important fairy, for when the sun awoke, she was the first fairy to rise. Carrying her mysterious fairy dust, she, like clockwork, whizzed above all of the little fairy homes, scattering behind her a glistening trail of the most delicious, distinctive scent of rose petals. Within seconds, the fairies' noses were twitching, the birds were singing, and the bees were buzzing. The Dales was now awake, and a new day began. Chapter 1. Grandma Rosary and the Comfort Tree. The morning was bright, and the sky above was as blue as the sea. The fairies bustled about excitedly in their homes, selecting their finest outfits, making sure that they were presentable for a special afternoon tea with Grandma Rosary. You see, today was Dummy Day. This meant that the time had come for the little fairies to fill their bags and give all of their old dummies to the gracious Grandma to look after. However, not all of the fairies were happy about this. On this day, Fairy Dales had some very excited fairies, but it also had some very sad and nervous ones too. There were fairies that didn't even use their dummies anymore, so they were fine, whilst there were others that did. Grandma Rosary was a very caring and wise fairy, and she only took the old tired dummies that weren't of use anymore. Over at the Thistle Tower, Fairy Timmy Thistle was busy rinsing his dummy under warm soapy water in preparation, making sure that it sparkled clean. His dummy had gathered dust from being kept inside his sock drawer for far too long. He didn't mind giving his dummy to Grandma Rosary. He was more excited about having cream tea and cakes with the other fairies. On the opposite side of the Dales, at Bluebell Barn, Fairy Bluebell Bray was very sad and very worried. His little dummy was so precious to him. He held on to it so tightly and found it extremely difficult to put his tired and used dummy into his little bag. He definitely didn't want to hand it over to Grandma Rosary. He just didn't understand why he couldn't keep it. Up on the hilltop lived Grandma Rosary, in the trunk of the very old enchanted oak tree that sat proudly overlooking the fairy dales. Fairy Rosary was busy making puffy petal cushions for all of the fairies to sit on, spreading them around her little garden in front of the enchanted old oak tree. She had already filled tiny pots with glittery fairy dust early that morning as a gift to the fairies in return for their dummies, and she was preparing plenty of berry juice, cream tea and cherry cakes for all of them. As the big blazing sun sat high up in the sky, the Fairy Dale's bell chimed loudly. All of the fairies gathered together in the town square, comparing their little dummies and chatting happily. They instantly joined hands, looking like a daisy chain, their little bags with their dummies attached firmly to their waists, and in one jump, they all took off into the air. They flew high over the fairy homes, making their way up to the hilltop. As they landed, one after the other, they cuddled Grandma Rosary and then sat down on the cushions of the petals. The air was filled with sweet rose, and it was buzzing with bees collecting the soft pollen in the surrounding flowers. Grandma's little crooked door was open as she hobbled back and forth, serving juice, tea and delicious cakes to the fairies. Once the fairies were calm and their tummies were full, Grandma Rosary began to talk. "Hello, my lovelies. Today is a very brave and special day for all of you. I know that all of your dummies are precious and cherished. They have been with you for many fairy years. It is always a little sad when we decide to let them go. And for this, I came up with somewhere very special for them to go. So here I present to you all the dummy tree. The little fairies were listening carefully as Grandma Rosary continued. We shall hang all of your precious dummies on my old oak tree and call it the Fairy Dale's Comfort Tree. I promise to take extra special care of all of them. The fairies sat listening attentively to Grandma Rosary. They looked up at the old oak tree and imagined their dummies high in the branches. The little fairy faces beamed. They looked at each other with mouths opened wide. They squealed and jumped in the air and started to sing as they flew around the trunk of the tree. Up and down, how jolly are we, round and round the old oak tree. Up on the hilltop standing bright, our dummies are bathed in love and light. Oh, shine our precious comfort tree, day and night for all to see. Grandma Rosary was overjoyed to see that her suggestion had caused such excitement amongst the fairies. She couldn't help but notice that one little fairy didn't seem to agree. He looked very unhappy, and his head looking downwards, and a rainbow-coloured dummy held tightly in his mouth. His little eyebrows frowned. Fairy Bluebell Bray did not want to leave his dummy at all. Grandma Rosary made her way over to him and sat gracefully down beside him. She took his little hand and placed it gently in hers. Just behind his dummy, she could see his chin wobble as if he was about to cry. They softly chatted for a little while, and Bluebell Bray's face began to smile gradually. A little pot of multicoloured fairy dust was exchanged for his precious and colourful dummy. Grandma lifted Bluebell Bray into the air and swirled around, hugging him. He was soon singing along with the other fairies. Flying around, how happy are we? Round and round the old oak tree. Up on the hilltop day and night, holding our dummies oh so tight. Oh, shine our precious comfort tree, light up the night for all to see. The fairies then formed a queue alongside the old oak tree. One by one, they flew up into the branches to hang their dummies amongst the leaves. When the old oak tree was completely full, the little fairies joined hands, nodded to Grandma Rosary, and flew back home. Down into the dales. As soon as they landed in the town square, the bell chimed loudly, and off they all flew their separate ways. The evening came, the sun went to sleep. High up in the branches were little cocooned homes belonging to the family of fireflies. The fireflies were very important in Fairy Dales, as the elderly fireflies lit up the old oak tree at night so that it shone brightly over the dales. The younger ones sat on little twigs to light up the pathways around the dales, enabling the fairies to see in the dark. The big bright moon rose in the dark night sky. The fairies filled their fires with logs of wood, making sure their little home stayed warm throughout the night. They dressed in their pyjamas and little bobble hats, snuggling down, warm and cozy, into their beds. Lying on their pillows, they could see the top of the hill where Rosary lives through their windows, and up there, glistening with lights from the fireflies and decorated with dummies of all shapes and colours, stood proud old oak tree, twinkling bright for all to see. This was Fairy Dale's very own comfort tree. The fairies closed their eyes, and Fairy Dales of Alberton Forest fell deeply, deeply to sleep. That is the end of chapter 1. The Fairy Dales of Alberton Forest. I could go on and on. I was absolutely enchanted in that story, weren't you? And book lovers, all of the old dummies on the old oak tree and twinkling by the fireflies, that reminds me a bit of a Christmas tree with all of its decorations and Christmas lights, doesn't it? Okay, book lovers, if you enjoyed our story today as much as we did, don't forget to hit the like button and also subscribe to our videos, and we will read together again next time. Okay, book lovers, I'll see you again next time. Bye.